My next guest is Patty McGee. She is a nationally recognized literacy consultant, speaker, and educator with a passion for transforming classrooms into spaces where language and learning come alive. With decades of experience as a teacher, coach, and advocate for delightful literacy practices, Patty has worked alongside educators across the country, partnering to unlock the full potential of their students through innovative and practical teaching strategies. Not Your Granny's Grammar is her third book. Most teachers have learned grammar through worksheets and are teaching it the same way. So she'll be talking about her book and how that can help teachers when they're teaching grammar. She spent 2 decades helping schools shift to grammar study, which is a collaborative inquiry-based approach that actually sticks. And she is as well a 2002 Milken Award recipient. Well, welcome to the podcast, Patty.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we'll go ahead and get started with the question I ask everyone. Tell me about a time you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
So there's too many to count, but
Mhm.
I'm going to focus on grammar. Um, I remember in my early years of teaching back in the 90s
Mhm.
where instruction, my instructional practices were improving. Students were learning, thriving, and then I would get to the obligatory grammar lessons
Mhm.
that I needed to follow. And of many things that were challenging, I found that to be something that was especially challenging for me because I really didn't know any other way to teach grammar except the way that I was taught.
Mhm.
I was taught, like many, with worksheets and fill in the blanks and diagramming and memorizing parts of speech and things like that. And so that's really where a lot of my instruction fell short.
Mhm.
Um, and it's taken me a couple of decades to crawl out
Mhm.
of that trench. Um, but it's been kind of a self study to begin with. What are some alternatives to grammar instruction? Or what's been missing in grammar instruction that is found in other things that we learn?
Mhm.
Um, and and that's really where I've come to all of these decades later.
Mhm. 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 So we can talk about some of the things that I mentioned around your book in the bio about some of the things you found out as you've worked through this study. So, why does traditional grammar fail when we're trying to instruct it, and what works instead? And why do you think, as well, students aren't taught grammar anymore?
Yeah. So be sure I answer all of those questions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Um, but first, I think that grammar instruction does not happen as much anymore because of the way that we learned or the way that we were taught.
mm-hmm,
There's a small percentage of teachers, and this is just in my own anecdotal research,
mm-hmm,
that learned grammar in that traditional fashion.
mm-hmm,
And there is an assumption that because we're educators, we must know grammar just as well as any
mm-hmm,
grammarian. And secretly, a lot of us feel ashamed to realize that we don't know grammar as well as, say, our colleague across the hall.
mm-hmm,
And so the not knowing of grammar paired with the shame of not knowing,
mm-hmm,
and then add in these traditional practices where we're not really seeing application and growth, it it's a perfect storm for avoiding grammar instruction altogether.
mm-hmm,
I think that grammar is actually also one of the forgotten foundational skills
mm-hmm,
that in the science of reading movement, uh, obviously phonics took the front row seat of this movement. And it needed to, because in many places it was being undertaught or not taught at all.
mm-hmm,
Um, that said, one of the threads in Scarborough's rope is uh, in the language comprehension thread is basically syntax, being able to understand what is being written there
Mhm.
And we can do so by understanding how sentences are constructed.
Mhm.
And that's really what I noticed too, is that, and this was in the research, that the most effective approach to grammar instruction is is sentence construction,
Mhm.
sentence expansion, and sentence combining.
Okay.
And it was rare that most of us had that type of experience in grammar. And so instead, what else can we do? What
Mhm.
else is there? And I just started to think and look and read, um, and sometimes when I find a problem of my practice, I actually look at things that we're learning outside of the classroom.
Mhm.
So here was this methodology in grammar instruction that was all I knew. Then I looked at something in my own life that I had been studying, and that was and continues to be using these special chalk paints and waxes to refinish furniture. And in doing that, there were many things that I did. I can tell you, though, I never once filled in a blank to learn it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, I experimented. I got curious about what I could do with these paints and waxes. And I took those experiments and I brought them to someone who's more expert than I am. And they gave me feedback. And they also showed me step by step on how to do certain things with
Mhm.
the paints and waxes. Then I would play around with those ideas before I would actually put it on the furniture.
Mhm.
Um, and then I would memorize some of the techniques, and I would often reflect and say, okay, so here's what I did with this piece of furniture. What can I bring with me
Mhm.
to the next piece of furniture? But then what can I also imagine?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I saw that all of those entry points in my study of paint and
Yeah.
waxes and thought, that's missing from grammar instruction.
Mhm.
So, this inquiry approach of like starting by getting curious
Yeah.
about grammar and then moving into those sorts of entry points of uh, hypothesizing, getting feedback that's not corrective, it's instructive,
Mhm.
um, explicit step by step lessons, time to play with those concepts, and time to get on the spot kind of coaching with
Mhm.
it, and time to reflect. What do we know for sure now about this grammatical concept? And what is it that we're still curious about?
Mhm.
And creating opportunities for curiosity around grammar is relatively uncommon. um, I love the work from Whitney LaRocca, Travis Leach, and Jeff Anderson in their grammar work because it was really starting with an inquiry stance. So I was
Mhm.
greatly influenced by that and wanted to have multiple opportunities and scaffolds before
Mhm.
students were expected to apply these grammar experiences into something in their writing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you told me how students are often vulnerable about their
Mhm,
writing,
mhm,
and teachers tend to give a lot of feedback on how kids write. But a lot of the time, teachers are using correctness policing instead of just, helping kids be curious. And I would say I'm probably one of those, having taught both
mhm,
different world languages and English.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
you know, I've often corrected, done the red pen piece, right? Instead
mhm,
of asking them to, maybe underlining it instead of actually
mhm.
correcting it for them, right?
Right, exactly. Because when you think about it, correction isn't actually teaching. It is
Mhm.
more of a assessment response, like whether you got the answer correct or not. And I
Yeah.
often equate it to math. Like if we have an equation and it's 2 plus 2 and we answer 5,
Hmm.
and a teacher crosses it out, changes it to 4,
Mhm.
do we understand like why it's 4?
Yeah.
Do we understand the meaning behind that equation? It's the same thing with writing and grammar correction. It's correcting, but it's not really building conceptual knowledge of how to compose on the page or on a computer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What would you say as well for students who tend to use Grammarly or other AI to correct essays and other writing assignments
Mhm.
without necessarily learning the grammar rules?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the part. I believe that we are going to start to see some really helpful uses of AI.
Mhm.
I use AI for ideas on how I can reframe something that I've already created myself. And I take or leave those ideas. But that's because I know what I want to say and I know how I want to
Mhm.
say it.
Mhm.
And I know what I want my sentences to express and
Mhm.
the order I want to express them. And
Mhm.
that's because I have gone through this self study of grammar. And
Mhm.
when we think of grammar as style, the way a painter might consider their paintbrush creating on the page, grammar is that as well. So we can look at anything from AI with a much more discerning eye when we know grammar, when we have built some grammar know how to decide, is this really the way I want to express myself? And so they need to go hand in hand.
Um, like we said, there's a lot of teachers who don't teach grammar anymore. It's not like built into curricula. Um, and from our generation, I think that was often something we learned in middle school and even upper
Mhm.
elementary. So given the fact that a lot of students are asked to write essays sometimes already in middle school, but at least in high school, but haven't been taught foundational grammar. Would you say the best way to teach the grammar is through modeling, mentoring?
Mhm.
How do English, social studies teachers, people that ask for writing assignments need to teach that grammar?
Yes. Well, the entry points I just described,
Mhm.
I think the majority of those entry points are mostly taught or created experiences around um, the ELA teacher to carve out a 10-minute pocket 3 to 5 times a week to
Mhm.
build grammar know how over time. And
Mhm.
I also believe that starting at the sentence level of simple, compound, and complex sentences is incredibly helpful because the sentences are the containers of all parts of speech
Mhm.
and also the building blocks of writing.
Mhm.
So if we're supporting sentence construction and combining, as well as expansion, then at the end of that type of learning, it's not the end, it just means we've studied it for an extended period of time, that we co-create some tools for transfer,
Mhm.
that we maybe create a document that shows steps on how to create those 3 types of sentences.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then we can share that with our content area colleagues so
Mhm.
that when students are writing within the content area, they have this tool to refer to help them when they're expressing themselves in a content that they're just learning, probably concepts that are new, that they can go back and think, how can I construct my sentences now using this tool to be sure that I'm conveying what I'm trying to write about?
Mhm. What about using tools in English class? I would use warm-ups such as no reading. 'Cause some of those, like it's like a quiz, but they give you sentences based on a certain grammar piece. How would you say that's a good practice, or is that something kids need to explicitly learn?
I think they need to explicitly learn it.
Hmm.
And I've also heard from students who that is their primary grammar tool
Mm-hmm.
that they're using, and they're getting very frustrated by it
Mm-hmm.
because they're trying to beat themselves from the last time that
Yeah.
they engaged in it. And there's a speed factor to it. And
Mm-hmm.
for those who find grammar very difficult, uh, being a winner at a game around grammar can really instill even more shame around not knowing it well.
Mm-hmm.
So I like engagement with grammar, um, but competition, even against ourselves and finding our personal best,
Mm-hmm.
can really disengage students
Mm-hmm.
and create a feeling of embarrassment, avoidance. So it's a better alternative to what is um, often out there for us.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a tiny dose of something like that is better than other ways. We learn through, like, the social brain is the gatekeeper of all learning.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of using a screen for
Mm-hmm.
this, learning together with a partner or within a trio,
Yeah.
that type of experience where they're interacting with one another, they're being challenged to, let's say, create as many sentences as they can
Mm-hmm.
from words in a sentence. I call it sentences from a sentence, where we
Mm-hmm.
might find something. This is great for content area too. We might find a couple of sentences that we really like, and then open a document and write those sentences um, on the document and enlarge the
Mm-hmm.
font,
Mm-hmm.
and then cut out each word and each piece of punctuation. And then in partnerships or trios, um, to create as many sentences as they can.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they can use the words as many times as they want to. So it's not like once I use I can't use I again. No, it's just as many sentences as we can. And so we're
Mm-hmm.
talking grammar out loud. We're
Mm-hmm.
looking at each other's faces and responses. We're It's often funny, some of the sentences that we create, and there's actual delight
Mm-hmm.
in these types of experiences. And it doesn't have to, and it shouldn't last very long. Um, I think that's a much more valuable experience than a computer based a computer based challenge. But they have
Mm-hmm.
lots of good information. A lot of these websites, like, they just answer the grammar questions that we are curious about or are um, mixing up, or, there's certainly value there. I think there's greater value to human interaction.
Yeah, yeah. No, I get the point there. You also share practical Monday morning strategies. So tell me about some of these things that you share with people that subscribe to your newsletter or other sites.
Yes. So those who subscribe to my newsletter, it's a very short, I
Hmm.
call it just like nuggets of teaching.
Hmm.
But the way that I choose what goes into those uh, emails are things that are simple, powerful, and free. And sometimes they're instructional moves, sometimes they are resources, sometimes they're something that can act as a refresher on a
Hmm.
Monday morning, connecting us back to the grammar concepts we've been studying or anything else. And I love them because when it's simple, powerful, and free, we don't need anything blingy. We don't
Hmm.
need a slide deck that's 60 slides, or
Yeah,
we
yeah.
don't need to have a lot. We just need to have, ideally, moments of play to refresh us from different things that we've learned
Hmm.
in the past.
Hmm. You also have a PDF I'll link in the show notes. So one of the things I wanted to point out from the PDF is a fragments no more activity,
Yeah.
because that's something you often get when you teach English and correct essays, that there's a lot of
Hmm.
students that use fragments. So talk to me about how that can be maybe a group activity or with a partner.
Hmm. Yes. So in Fragments No More, I'll describe it. Basically, we have three columns
Mm-hmm.
and then a number of rows. In the
Mm-hmm.
middle column, we will have inserted ourselves fragments,
Mm-hmm.
and they are labeled as fragments. So we're not trying to identify fragments. We've already done that.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk about what makes it a fragment. The more substantial part of this particular tool is that with the fragments in the center column, students can turn that fragment into a sentence
Mm-hmm.
by adding words in the left column, adding words in the right column, or both, so that they're constructing a full sentence out loud with each other. And it's practicing creating, gosh, you can use content from a content area you want to remember or refresh. You can use any topic that you want
Mm-hmm.
to. It could be like picking fragments out of a book that we're reading from some sentences to practice remembering the
Mm-hmm.
parts of the book. Um, they can be social and emotional learning fragments, but it gives kids a chance to then take fragments and turn them into sentences
Mm-hmm.
with each other. So that,
Okay.
yeah, that's one example.
Okay, great. And I think, yeah, as much as people can use activities like this in their content area, I think that would be a
Mhm.
great opportunity for people to practice grammar, in whatever
Mhm.
content, because you're learning to write in those other classes. I
Yeah.
wanted to highlight your book, which is Not Your Granny's Grammar, which was published in
Mhm.
June. Talk
Yeah.
to me about how it can help teachers of any subject, and how maybe
Yeah.
they should read the book instead of maybe cover to cover.
Yes. So it's interesting because I have been part of a district where a number of teachers have chosen this as their read for this year.
Mm-hmm.
And they chose to read it by starting with chapter one,
Okay.
because chapter one will give us an overview of what we mean by not your granny's grammar. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, comparing what was taught for decades, if not centuries,
Mm-hmm.
um, and what it looks like then comparatively to the structures we suggest, to the methods we suggest, to the entry points. And then after they read the first chapter, and at the end of that first chapter, suggested scope and sequence for grades 2 through 8, they were like, I really need to know more about grammar before I go any further. So they jumped to the back, which is, I think, pure gold. My co author, Tim Donahue, wrote a grammar refresher. So all of the things that we may not remember about grammar and we're too afraid to ask are in there. And he's done it in such a clever way. It's full of some memes that we created. But I think also within that gold mine is a special, is like a diamond in there too, where he decided to videotape himself teaching some of the harder concepts. So he put a dry erase board in his basement, and he has three boys between fourth grade and eighth grade, and they all helped him by filming him teaching certain concepts. So they decided to go to that chapter next. And then chapter 2 is all about setting up. Chapter 3 is we suggest following it day by day. Um, and that the reason we suggest following it day by day is because it's been really well field tested. Like we practiced it as often as we could. We asked many teachers to try it out, and it's been adjusted with their feedback. And in a nutshell, it's the entry points that I was talking about, referring to earlier, that we'll find in that chapter 3. And then the rest are um, kind of a choose your own adventure. It's would you like to study a mentor text and get curious about that? Do you need some explicit anchor charts around some concepts? There's a chapter on grammar manipulatives, like you were talking about with fragments no more, or the sentences from a sentence. There's a whole bunch of those. There's also a chapter on transfer, which is one of the places that teachers have identified as a big challenge. It actually came in number 3. Number 1 challenge was, I don't know grammar. Number 2 challenge was, I do not want these drill worksheet experiences. And number 3 was, how do we create transfer of these grammatical concepts? And then finally, there's one on assessment, which I broke up into thinking about assessment of learning versus assessment for learning. And so when we use assessment for learning, the research says that that can double the rate of student learning. And research of learning is a summative assessment. So we're finding out just how much kids are retaining and remembering about particular grammar concepts. But there's many choices in there. And I also have a matrix. So if you're looking for assessing a certain thing, the different places that you can find ways or find kind of just really authentic in classroom, on the spot ways of assessing.
So it sounds like you have a bit of um, just a mix of things for everybody who's wanting to learn how
Mm-hmm.
to effectively teach grammar. And like I
Mm-hmm.
said, it's definitely for people that teach any subject area. But I think, like you said, a how-to guide in terms of the transfer assessment piece,
Mm-hmm.
looking at retaining and learning for students, but also how, questions that teachers are
Mm-hmm.
afraid to ask, right? So like you said,
Yeah.
with these videos and all that. So I
Yeah.
also wanted to ask, are you planning on speaking at any conferences in the late spring, early summer where people might be able to tune in to see you?
Yes. So just next week, I have a session. In fact, they opened it early. LitCon
Mhm.
um, is something out of Ohio, and they have a conference every year. And this year they made it virtual.
Mhm.
So that is, I have a session on there with a friend of mine, Melissa. Um, and then coming up in March, I'll be in New Orleans at the Plain Talk Conference.
Mhm.
And that is an in person conference, but who doesn't want to go to New Orleans?
Mhm.
um, and then there's St. Mary's College in California, which is just a beautiful literacy learning center that is just so rich. I'll be speaking on that as well. That one is virtual.
Great, great. Well, we've had a great conversation today around your book, really about why teaching grammar is still important today, even though it's not taught like we learned it,
Mhm.
and also about how teachers can use some of the strategies that you share, both in your
Mhm.
newsletter and your book, to
Mhm.
feel more confident in teaching grammar through context. Out of everything
Yeah,
we've talked about, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
I've been thinking about this one. There's so many things. Um, but I want to say not knowing grammar as well as we'd like to
Mhm.
holds no shame.
Yeah.
We might feel the shame. It's not necessary to feel the shame. We
Hmm.
have so many resources available to us at our fingertips that can help us minimize that. And
Hmm.
knowing that the majority of educators are not grammarians, and
Hmm.
that's okay.
Hmm. Hmm. Where can people connect with you and find you online?
Mm. So I have a website at pattymcgee.org, but make sure you spell Patty with a Y, because if you spell Patty with an I, you're going to get lots of articles about this famous skateboarder in the 60s.
Mhm.
Not me. She's amazing. She can skateboard on her hands, but I can't even skateboard on my feet. So that's not the same person. So pattymcgee.org, spelling Patty with a Y. I'm also on LinkedIn and I'm also on Instagram. And just my handle on Instagram is at PMG McGee.
Great, great. I'll make sure I include those in the show notes. Well, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
being my guest today on the Out of the Trenches podcast. It was a pleasure learning more about teaching grammar and also helping teachers who would like to teach more grammar in their classes but aren't sure how to. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.